Welcome, it's the Matt Sager Podcast, Monday, February 11th, and gosh, it seems like it's only been, 6 days since we last spoke? Yeah, my 100th episode in which I said, yeah, my health's a little rocky, but nothing to worry about. This is going to pass in a couple days, not going to interrupt the show or any other part of my life. I don't know who I thought I was kidding, but it turns out my health is garbage. And yes, I am sick of discussing it. I only do so because, well, for one, I've said in the past that this podcast is all about a mission of, among other things, entertainment being top, comedy being second, although that encompasses the scope of entertainment, but also a transparency. Like, I'm not going to lie unless I've really got to. And I might as well be upfront about it. When I discussed my illness last week, I said, well, at least it's not herpes. Although if it were herpes, then at least I could take some meds for it. The reason herpes was even on my mind is because my eyeball, my left eye, has been bulging out of its socket, like the Toxic Avenger, basically. Google a photo of the Toxic Avenger, and that is basically what my eye is doing, bulging out in a very unnatural and incredibly painful way. So when I first started feeling this way and exhibiting this bulging eye, like 6 weeks ago, I went to my eye doctor and she said, oh, listen, I don't mean to give you any kind of weird stigma or anything, because this is not something you acquire sexually. It's not an STD, but your eye is showing symptoms of what we call ocular herpes, which are two words that, it's like having syphilis of the cheekbone or something. It's horrifying. But she actually did, and this was another thing I brought up last week, that, if only it were herpes, I could take some Valtrex. She put me on Valtrex, along with a bunch of eye drops and stuff. And what ended up happening was it got worse and it spread to the other eye. And she said, oh, all right, well, it turns out it can't be herpes because herpes does not spread from one eye to the next. And as annoyed as I was mostly relieved that I would never have to report to anyone that I had herpes of any sort, let alone affecting my eyes. So the eyes eventually die down, weeks go by, and then last week I show up with a fever and sounding like I do now, which is not my ideal voiceover or broadcasting voice. And I said, well, it's just some unknown virus. It is what it is. I had a fever all last week, a really high fever, which is why right after celebrating the 100th episode of the Matt Sager Podcast, which is still something that just fills me with so much pride and joy and gratitude to all of you, I believe the exact words I signed off with were something to the effect of, I can't wait to come back tomorrow and begin the next 100 episodes. And then lo and behold, the next night came and I posted a rerun. And then for the rest of the week, I just didn't put up anything because I didn't know what to say. I don't want to bore you with endless repeats. If I've got nothing to offer, then I would just as soon leave it be. But so last night, Sunday, after like a week of a high fever, my fever broke completely. And I said, this is great. Tomorrow I'm rejoining the world. I'm doing a new podcast. Now, one of those is true. I am doing a new podcast. But while the fever is still gone and many of the cold flu-like symptoms have vanished, guess what's acting up again? That eye is now just, it looks like a David Cronenberg movie. It's just awful. So tomorrow I'm going to get that looked at, and hopefully, presumably at this point, whatever it is I've got, herpes or no, I promise you it's not herpes. It's not a tumor, and it's not herpes. But whatever it is I've got, it has been one long thing. Like whatever started off as a bulging eye 6 to 7 weeks ago is the same thing that caused me to be sick last week and is the same thing that's caused the eye to bulge yet again today. So hopefully we're going to really lock down what it is. My whole deal is that I don't really present well to doctors. Like whether it were herpes or a cold or a flu, even allergies, there are lots of sort of touchstone signs that doctors look for, really obvious markers of this disease versus that disease. And as long as you're playing in the realm of, sort of someone who hasn't traveled to another country in the last several months, basic American homemade diseases, doctors can generally look at you, give you a couple of tests, and give you a good prognosis. Not necessarily a positive prognosis, but a good idea of what it is you are or are not dealing with in terms of sickness. And I want to point out, I'm not in any way besmirching any of my doctors. I've got the most amazing. I am so lucky to live in New York City and to still, amongst all this demand for the best that medicine has to offer, I still have pretty much the best doctors I could possibly imagine getting. But as I said, I don't present properly. I remember when I was 19, I had terrible strep throat. And I didn't know this for about a year because what would happen would be every 3 or 4 days I'd wake up with, no exaggeration, temperatures of 104, 105 even, and hallucinating because that's how high my temperature was. My brain was boiling. But at no point during that time in my visits to my various doctors did I cough or even sound like I had a scratchy voice. So it took a very long time for someone to go, you know what, let's just test you for everything. So you got something. And it turned out to be strep throat. And that has been a commonality in my medical maladies through life. That I show up looking like I've got herpes of the eye, then it turns out I don't. don't, so then they treat it as something else, and then it turns out it's not that either. I'm not complaining about my medical care. It's quite good. I am complaining about myself and the fact that I don't present well. Basically anything you can get that I've got, 9 out of 10 doctors dealing with 9 out of 10 patients could identify it on the spot, treat it easily with like a 3-day course of the right antibiotic. Because, of course, it's got to be the right one. They need to know what they're dealing with. And as I've said, I do not believe that there are better doctors in New York City that I could have treating me for this stuff, and yet they're flummoxed. So at a certain point, as with all problems that confound and frustrate you, you've got to look inward, and that's what I'm doing. I'm looking inward and saying, Matt, do me a favor, whatever you get next, please try and sort of exhibit the classic symptoms of it so doctors know what the hell to do with you, so it doesn't drag on and on in this way. So in the nature of stuff that drags on and on and on, and in the interest of getting off this topic of medicine and onto anything else, because I hate talking about this health crap, the Grammys were last night, and they were a bit of a shit show, from what I could tell. The truth is, I didn't watch the whole ceremony. Unlike movies, I'm quite disinterested in much of what modern music has to offer. It's not because I don't think it's good, although in many cases I don't. But I mean, like what hip-hop's got to offer right now, I know to be great. But I hate to say this, especially right after discussing my health, but I come from a different time. My favorite hip-hop artist of the last 15, 20 years would be, I don't know, Dr. Dre, Eminem. The all-time Hall of Famers for me would be Public Enemy and NWA. I get that there's not just one new style, but several subgenres, and that they're great. But I just don't have a ton of interest in them. And I don't have a ton of time to say, all right, let me stop what I'm doing work-wise and cultivate an interest in music that I've kind of lost some interest in. But I am interested in just the award show drama that's been going on this year. From, I think, my 100th episode, I discussed the fact that the Oscars are officially going hostless, because that's how dramatic it is and how difficult it's become to get a host that's non-toxic. So the Grammys, you might have listened to an episode of this show I did several weeks back, in which, in discussing the Oscars, I brought up the fact that I'd worked on many award shows, including the Grammys. I worked on the Grammys in either 93 or 94. It was the year in which Frank Sinatra was mid-speech, accepting his Lifetime Achievement Award, and he was getting a little dazed looking and kind of droning on a bit. And rather than having rehearsed for this and prepared for this, and rather than giving him a sign of, hey, Blue Eyes, time to cut it short, they played him off stage and went to a commercial. Now, I happen to be the only member of the production team that year who, for whatever reason, during that time, during Frank's acceptance speech, I was not inside Radio City watching. I was instead doing something in the production trailer. So it was just me alone in a trailer with me and a phone that only people from CBS ought to have had access to. I believe it was CBS that broadcast the Grammys that year. And yet my little production phone lit up, all the lines lit up, with guys who either were or were pretending to be wise guys, giving me what appeared to be quite serious threats to my person. Because as an entity, the Grammys had insulted Frank Sinatra so deeply, so grievously, that we were going to be made to suffer. And I, as the voice of the Grammys on the phone, was made to be alert, to watch my back, because someone was going to shoot me in the back of the head. I didn't think that they would, and obviously they didn't, but it was what I would call an unforced error on the part of Grammys and producer Ken Ehrlich, among others. I mention Ken specifically only because he seems to have pissed off a lot of people. Immediately prior to the awards, Ariana Grande pulled out, and she made it very clear, because the Grammys went ahead and tried to do damage control and said, Ariana Grande doesn't know how to adapt, she's not good with groups, she doesn't play well with others, she's not interested in conforming to the Grammy style. And she called Ken out. She said, no, listen, Ken, here's the deal. I want to play my song. I don't want to be part of a Partridge Family variety show style medley with two other acts with whom I've got nothing in common. I want to play the song that is being honored this year, the song that, when we first made arrangements for me to appear on the show, and you printed all these posters advertising the fact that I'd be performing, the piece which we agreed together, Kat, that I would do. Now, both parties eventually stuck to their line, and I don't know which one is lying. It would be an overstatement to say that I know Ken. I worked with Ken like 25 years ago for 5 days, and found him to be overall quite nice. I do know that the award shows in general, as a body, and this may or may not have anything to do with Ken as well, but they do sort of throw their weight around. They do often treat artists fairly poorly. Many of the greatest artists of our time were never even honored by the Grammys unless it was posthumously. This artist died. Oh, well, let's do a big tribute to him. Even though you look through the past 20, 25 years that this artist could have been nominated for, let alone win a Grammy, we ignored them completely. But now that they're dead, let's pick the bones. Let's be vultures, and let's now realize our mistake and sort of try and act as though we knew all along that this artist was great. I find that to be not only morbid, but sort of backward thinking and stupid and certainly obnoxious. So it's not difficult for me to imagine that Ariana Grande, who seems like a perfectly nice person, could have a real existential beef with the Grammys, who may or may not actually be represented by Ken Ehrlich. Like, it could have been his decision, or it could have been that the Academy told him what they wanted to do, and it was his job as producer to just suck it up and deliver that message to her, and she took it however she would. But that wasn't all she was doing. You know, she said she was boycotting, she wasn't going to watch, she wasn't going to attend. Now, the attendance part certainly proved to be true, but apparently she got really upset and clearly was watching when they gave out the award for Best Rap Album, which, by the way, just as when I believe it was the White Album by the Beatles that was up for nomination or wasn't even nominated, the Grammys gave the Record of the Year that year to Girl from Ipanema. And I always keep that in the front of my mind when I think about the Grammys and the ways in which they're just perpetually out of touch, just the latest ones to the party, culturally and musically speaking. That, you know, this is nitpicking compared to the Girl from Ipanema nonsense, but Best Rap Album, could you not join the 20th century and call it hip-hop? I mean, I get it. It's only been like 15 years since we've had a Best Metal category, and the first award in that category went to Jethro Tull. So yeah, the Grammys are a bit tone-deaf, culturally speaking, if not musically so. But so Best Rap Album went to Cardi B, with whom I don't believe, again, I do not keep up with this stuff. I'm so disinterested in drama, musically or otherwise, but I don't believe that Ariana Grande is in a war with Cardi B. And I don't believe that Cardi B winning the award is what set her off. What set her off was that her late ex-boyfriend, Mac Miller, was snubbed. And she went on Twitter and called it bullshit and called the Grammy Awards trash. That's certainly her right. If only that were the only incident last night that gave me flashbacks. Sadly, it was not. The other was Drake, who was quite surprised, apparently, to win award for Best Rap Song for God's Plan. So he gets up and makes what is a very short, concise, and eloquent speech, not at all like what was going on with Frank Sinatra. But maybe this was because of his surprise, maybe this was just the message he wanted to send, but he made a point of saying, listen, I'm very, very honored, but to everyone who didn't win tonight, and for everyone who isn't getting acknowledged in general for your music and your art, believe me, the only thing that matters is not an award, but if one of your fans comes up and says that they've been inspired by you, if a group wins a Grammy several years from now and say that they learned everything they knew from listening to you, like all the different ways in which one can be honored and acknowledged that do not involve awards. The Grammys apparently considered this an insult, although at no point did he say, F the Grammys, or screw this award, I'm not interested. He said, I'm really grateful, but no one should consider this a loss because awards are not all there is in life. They're not the only way in which you can be validated as an artist. And as soon as he starts touching on that point, bam, right to a commercial mid-speech. Now, the Grammys have since issued a statement saying, oh, well, it just seemed like a natural ending point. It looked like he was done. Watch the video. It doesn't look like he's done. He was in no way done, other than, in all likelihood, with the Grammys. I would suspect that he'll never make another appearance again, which is fine. The relevance of these shows, sadly, drama's really all they've got to offer. The idea that we're facing a hostless 3-hour-long Oscars broadcast is just mind-blowing to me. It's enough already. Lastly, I did want to talk about one other thing before I return to my deathbed. I mean, my sick bed. Knock on wood. But I do expect to be back tomorrow, quite possibly still sounding a little bit beat up, so my apologies in advance. But I did want to mention, major announcement today from Marvel and Hulu, which is surprising given that Marvel and, say, Netflix have had a real parting of ways. Now, I'll grant you, when that happened, when the cancellation of Iron Fist then led to a cancellation of Luke Cage, Defenders, not officially, but clearly are scrapped. And Punisher is believed to be over after the recent Season 2, and Jessica Jones will have a Season 3, and that'll be it. So when all of those cancellations were announced, I just frankly assumed it was Marvel, because there's this upcoming Disney Plus streaming service set to launch later this year, 2019, which, among other things, they've already announced. That, for instance, Captain Marvel. I believe that will be the first Marvel movie that will not see Netflix. It will never air on Hulu or Amazon Prime, or not until it first has an exclusive run on Disney Plus. So it kind of made sense to me that launching a service that is, among other things, designed to really compete with Netflix, that Marvel would begin pulling their shows, and that was unfortunate, but I guess just inevitable. But it has since been revealed that it was actually Netflix who cut ties with all these shows themselves, that Marvel apparently, according to my best sources, had nothing to do with it other than to say, oh, well, we'll take these lemons and make lemonade by doing something else with these characters in a future date. That was very surprising to me. So given that it was Netflix who made all these decisions to cancel shows, as opposed to Marvel doing it in preparation for their Disney Plus streaming service launching later this year, that makes this less surprising that a major announcement regarding Hulu and Marvel was announced today. 4 new animated series. This looks great. Now, it is worth noting that Disney Plus won't exactly be direct competitor with Hulu. I mean, they will be, but Hulu is largely owned by Fox, which has now been acquired completely by Disney. So Marvel, if they want to, can do all sorts of things to bend Hulu to their will. That will become increasingly more obvious as the year progresses, as the acquisition of Fox by Disney becomes more official, as Marvel starts really flexing their muscles and showing what they can do with this newfound ownership and this new control over all but one of their properties. Just Spider-Man, I believe, is left over at Sony. But they will regain control of the X-Men, Fantastic Four, and they'll have a majority stake in Hulu, which has announced these 4 new animated series with some major talent behind them. MODOK, that would be mental, mobile, or mechanized. Take your pick, but that is what accounts for the first M in the acronym MODOK, followed by organism designed only for killing. So mental organism designed only for killing, mobile organism designed only for killing, or mechanized organism designed only for killing. Point is, he's a guy with a gigantic head, teeny little baby legs and arms, and a big sort of hover suit that makes up his torso and pelvis. It's really creepy and weird and funny, and is a character who absolutely lends himself to animation. And in fact, the description that Marvel and Hulu provided to The Hollywood Reporter is, MODOK centers around an egomaniacal supervillain with a really big head and a really little body, who struggles to maintain control of his evil organization and his demanding family. Writers Jordan Blum and Patton Oswalt will executive produce. Next up, Hit Monkey. It's exactly what you think it is. A monkey assassin who has been featured prominently, kind of like almost an Easter egg, like you never know what series he'll pop up in, like in the middle of a really somber comic event. It'll be like, oh, and here's Hit Monkey doing something weird and crazy and genuinely a little bit scary because he is an assassin, in addition to being a cute little monkey. The description that Hollywood Reporter has via Marvel and Hulu is, Hit Monkey tells the tale of a wronged Japanese snow monkey, mentored by the ghost of an American assassin, as he cuts a wide swath through the Tokyo underworld in this darkly cinematic and brutally funny revenge saga. Writers Josh Gordon and Will Speck will executive produce. Tigra and Dazzler show. That is an interesting pair. I'll have to do a whole show sometime if you really want to know about the Dazzler and the history of the character. The character's history, as interesting as the character has been throughout the years, the story, the origin of the creation of Dazzler is fascinating. Tigra also has a very interesting origin story, not a true-to-life origin story like the behind-the-scenes machinations that provided us with the Dazzler, but the actual origin of Tigra dates back to like 1970, and at first it was a very feminist comic, then she became half cat, and then it became a very sort of highly sexualized comic, which is not to say it can't still be feminist, but she was written by basically exclusively guys for like 20, 25 years, so she is an interesting character, and I will leave it at that. But it's a woman who's also a cat. 2 great things that go great together. Tigra and Dazzler show, according to the description, is a story about 2 woke superheroes and best friends, Tigra and Dazzler, as they fight for recognition among powered people who make up the 8 million stories in Los Angeles. Writers Erica Rivinoja and Chelsea Handler serve as executive producers. I'm not a huge fan of Chelsea's comedy that I've seen. I do know her to be a very talented, organized, professional person. I've got nothing to say about any of these series. I'm just sounding off with what I know when I know it. For instance, I know that Patton Oswalt is a die-hard, long-time, lifelong comics fan, and that his involvement with MODOK bodes particularly well. Chelsea Handler, and in the case of Hit Monkey, Josh Gordon and Will Speck, I really don't know anything about any of them. So I'm just going to withhold comment until the shows start to air or I see trailers for them, and at that point I'll have something to say. Now, Howard the Duck, a very interesting character with a very interesting legacy, who was actually, at first, he was a really rather underground character created by the late great writer Steve Gerber. And it looks like it's that version of Howard, as of course it would be. Marvel in particular would love nothing more than for us all to pretend that that movie never happened, and I'm happy to oblige. So the description says Howard the Duck is trapped in a world he never made. That, of course, is Howard's tagline, his slogan, dating back to Howard the Duck #1, not his actually first appearance, which I believe was in the pages of Man-Thing. Boy, am I showing my nerdiness today. Keep in mind, I've been really sick for a bunch of days, and I've had lots of time to catch up on reading comics. So if I'm extra nerdy, I hope you'll understand why. But I'm also a very long-time, very hardcore fan of Steve Gerber, so it's fair to say I know a bit about the history of Howard the Duck. Somehow having that on my resume has never helped, but it's a skill I've got. If I can use it in service of this podcast, then I'm happy to do so. Howard the Duck is trapped in a world he never made, but America's favorite fighting fowl hopes to return home with the help of his unstoppable gal pal Beverly before the evil Dr. Bong. Yeah, like I said, 70s, kind of underground. Somehow Marvel had no idea what Dr. Bong was referring to. But before the evil Dr. Bong can turn him into the creepiest dish on the menu, writers Kevin Smith and Dave Willis will also executive produce. Kevin Smith is a big comics fan. He's got nothing to prove to you or me. He doesn't have a great track record writing comics. He did pretty well on, I guess, Green Arrow many, like 20 plus years ago. The comics which he's done since then, Spider-Man, The Evil That Men Do, Batman, The Widening Gyre, have been spotty, I'm going to generously say. But he certainly knows his way around animation. The Clerks animated series, incredibly underhyped, really needs more recognition, frankly. It's one of the best things that Kevin Smith's ever worked on. It's hilarious. And I believe that with a little bit of creative freedom given to him, which I'm sure is going to happen, on a streaming service with no weird network considerations of, oh, no, you can call somebody a penis, but you can't say somebody has a penis, or the FCC will come down on us with the rage of a million gods with subpoena power. Given free reign and a little bit of structure, but a lot of freedom, and to have a partner in the form of Dave Willis, I would say that Kevin Smith's Howard the Duck is a likely favorite. Then there's The Offenders. There's obviously a little bit of tongue-in-cheek humor here. The Offenders will follow MODOK, Dazzler and Tigra, Hitmonkey, and Howard the Duck. You see how first they all get their series, and then they all team up for what will hopefully not be a terribly underwhelming super team show. It follows all these characters as they are all forced to team up in order to save the world and certain parts of the universe. So other imminent shows from Marvel include a 6th season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. on ABC, the 3rd and last season of FX's Legion, which, this is not Marvel specifically, but it will be replaced with an excellent-looking comic series. When Legion departs, they'll begin development on an adaptation of Brian K. Vaughan's Y: The Last Man, which should be amazing. Finally, there are new seasons of The Gifted on Fox and Cloak and Dagger on Freeform. I actually got to watch some Cloak and Dagger these last few days as I've been recuperating, and it's fairly good. For a pair of characters who really have rarely received any kind of recognition, even in the pages of their own comic. It's a pretty darn good show. I would have dearly loved to see the Deadpool animated series that was going to feature Donald Glover in the title role, but sadly that does not appear to be on anyone's calendar anytime soon, which is a real shame, although that is something that Disney Plus could resuscitate, and I really hope that they do. I know that, for instance, they are planning original shows featuring, I believe there's 2 that they've announced, each featuring a team of heroes. One is going to be a Falcon Winter Soldier show, and another one, which I actually was not terribly excited the first time I heard this, and then as I learned more about what it was going to be like, what sort of plots are being discussed, I'm now very excited for this, a Vision and Scarlet Witch series. If you want to prepare for that, or if you just want to read an amazing comic, period, I cannot recommend to you highly enough the 12-issue Vision miniseries by Tom King. I believe it was published by Marvel in 2015. So with that, it's back to bed for me, but another podcast I expect will happen tomorrow. So in the meantime, get in touch with me. Make fun of me, wish me well. Please, more of the latter than the former. You can email matt@mattsager.com or call 646-535-4788. You can also reach me all across social media. On Twitter, I'm @MattSager. Instagram, I'm Real Matt Sager. And on Facebook, I've got a bunch of pages. My personal page is The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO. And this podcast page is Matt Sager Podcast. Also, check the links in the description for tonight's podcast episode for links to my Patreon, patreon.com/Matt Sager, and my merch store from my friends at wehavemerch.com. There are Matt Sager Podcast t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, and stickers, and I believe some more, so do check those out. As for everything else, my many more social media profiles and links, articles and blog posts, my contact info, and of course my voiceover reels. You can find all that at mattsagervoiceover.com.